Franklin Delano Roosevelt, January 30th to April 12, 1945, commonly known by his initials FDR, was the 32nd President of the United States, serving from 1933 until his death in 1945. He remains the only president to have served more than 2 terms. FDR led the nation through the Great Depression and World War II, emerging as one of the most influential figures in American history. Born into the affluent Roosevelt family in Hyde Park, New York, FDR was influenced by his father's Democratic leanings and the example of his distant cousin, President Theodore Roosevelt. After attending Harvard College, Roosevelt briefly attended Columbia Law School, but left after passing the bar exam in 1907. He married Eleanor Roosevelt in 1905, a partnership that would be both personal and political, as Eleanor became a prominent public figure in her own right. Roosevelt's early political career began in 1910 when he was elected to the New York State Senate. His opposition to the powerful Tammany Hall political machine and support for progressive causes earned him recognition. He then served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson from 1913 to 1920, where he gained valuable experience in government and military affairs. Although he was unsuccessful as the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket in 1920, the campaign helped establish his national reputation. In 1921, Roosevelt was stricken with polio, which left him paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this setback, he remained determined to continue his political career, teaching himself to walk short distances with braces and a cane. His public image carefully managed to downplay his disability. Roosevelt returned to politics in 1928 as the governor of New York. As governor, he implemented social programs to combat the effects of the Great Depression, positioning himself as a progressive reformer. In the 1932 presidential election, Roosevelt won a landslide victory against the incumbent, Herbert Hoover, with his promise of a New Deal for the American people. During his first 100 days in office, Roosevelt pushed through an unprecedented amount of legislation aimed at providing relief to the unemployed, recovering the economy, and reforming the financial system. Key programs included the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, the Public Works Administration, PWA, and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA. Roosevelt also ended prohibition with the 21st Amendment. Roosevelt's New Deal transformed the American government's role in the economy, creating a safety net for the poor and unemployed through Social Security and labor reforms. However, his efforts to expand the Supreme Court in 1937, after several New Deal programs were struck down, led to a political backlash and a slowdown in his legislative agenda. The outbreak of World War II shifted Roosevelt's focus to foreign affairs. Despite strong isolationist sentiment in the U.S., he began to prepare the country for potential involvement, supporting Britain and the Allies through programs like Lend-Lease, which provided military aid to nations fighting against the Axis powers. Roosevelt's leadership during the war, including his strategy to prioritize defeating Nazi Germany before turning full attention to Japan, was crucial in shaping the Allied victory. Roosevelt's ability to communicate directly with the American people through his fireside chats and his optimistic, confident leadership helped to bolster the nation's morale during both the Great Depression and World War II. He was elected to an unprecedented 3rd term in 1940 and then a 4th in 1944, although his health was declining significantly by then. In his later years, Roosevelt worked with Allied leaders like Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin to plan the post-war world, laying the groundwork for the United Nations. However, he did not live to see the end of the war. Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage on April 12, 1945, just months before the Allied victory in World War II. Roosevelt's legacy is complex and enduring. He is credited with reshaping the role of the federal government in American life and leading the nation through 2 of its greatest crises. His policies and leadership style continue to be studied and debated, with many historians ranking him among the greatest U.S. presidents. Early life and career. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born into the Roosevelt family, one of the oldest and most prominent families in New York. His father, James Roosevelt, was a businessman and landowner, and his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, came from a wealthy family with deep roots in New England. The young Roosevelt was tutored at home until he attended Groton School, an elite preparatory school in Massachusetts. He later attended Harvard College, where he earned a degree in history, although he was not a standout student. Roosevelt married Eleanor Roosevelt, his 5th cousin once removed, in 1905. Eleanor was the niece of President Theodore Roosevelt, who gave away the bride at their wedding. The couple had 6 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. Eleanor would later become a significant political figure in her own right, championing civil rights and social causes. Roosevelt's first foray into politics was in 1910, when he was elected to the New York State Senate. His tenure was marked by his opposition to the Tammany Hall political machine, which dominated New York Democratic politics. Roosevelt aligned himself with reformers and quickly gained a reputation as a progressive politician. In 1912, he supported Woodrow Wilson's presidential campaign, which led to his appointment as Assistant Secretary of the Navy in 1913. As Assistant Secretary, Roosevelt was an advocate for a strong Navy and worked to modernize the fleet. He also gained valuable experience in administrative and logistical matters, which would later prove crucial during World War II. However, his 1920 vice presidential run on the Democratic ticket was unsuccessful, leading to a temporary retreat from politics. The New Deal. In 1928, Roosevelt was elected governor of New York, where he implemented social welfare programs to address the economic hardships caused by the Great Depression. His success as governor positioned him as the frontrunner for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1932. Roosevelt's campaign promised a new deal for the American people, and his victory over Hoover marked the beginning of a new era in American politics. Once in office, Roosevelt launched a series of bold initiatives to combat the economic crisis. The New Deal focused on the 3 R's: relief for the unemployed, recovery of the economy, and reform of the financial system. Key programs included the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, which provided jobs in environmental conservation, and the Works Progress Administration, WPA, which created millions of jobs through public works projects. The Social Security Act of 1935 established a safety net for the elderly and unemployed, one of the most enduring legacies of the New Deal. Roosevelt also reformed the banking system, establishing the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, to protect depositors' savings, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, to regulate the stock market. The New Deal represented a significant expansion of the federal government's role in the economy, a shift that was both praised and criticized. The Supreme Court initially struck down several New Deal programs, leading Roosevelt to propose the Judicial Procedures Reform Bill of 1937, often called the Court Packing Plan. The proposal sought to add more justices to the Supreme Court, but it was met with widespread opposition and ultimately failed. However, the court gradually became more supportive of New Deal legislation, allowing Roosevelt to continue his reforms. World War II. As Europe descended into war in the late 1930s, Roosevelt recognized the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Despite the strong isolationist sentiment in the U.S., Roosevelt supported measures to aid the Allies, including the Lend-Lease Act of 1941, which provided military aid to Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. His administration also began to prepare the American military for the possibility of war. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, brought the United States fully into World War II. Roosevelt declared war on Japan, and shortly thereafter, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S. Roosevelt's leadership during the war was marked by his close collaboration with Allied leaders, including Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Together, they developed strategies that ultimately led to the defeat of the Axis powers. Roosevelt's wartime policies included the internment of Japanese Americans, a decision that has been widely criticized in subsequent years. However, his overall management of the war effort, including the mobilization of American industry and the creation of the Manhattan Project to develop the atomic bomb, was instrumental in the Allied victory. Roosevelt's vision for the post-war world included the creation of the United Nations, an international organization aimed at preventing future conflicts. He played a key role in shaping the organization's structure and objectives, although he did not live to see its establishment. Declining health and death. By the time of his 4th presidential term, Roosevelt's health had deteriorated significantly. He suffered from various ailments, including heart disease and hypertension, which were exacerbated by the stresses of the presidency and the war. Despite his declining health, Roosevelt continued to play an active role in both domestic and international affairs. In early 1945, Roosevelt met with Churchill and Stalin at the Yalta Conference, where they discussed plans for post-war Europe and the final stages of the war against Japan. Roosevelt's appearance at the conference shocked many due to his frail condition, and it became clear that his health was rapidly declining. On April 12, 1945, Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage at his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia. His death was met with widespread grief both in the United States and around the world. He was succeeded by his vice president, Harry S. Truman, who would oversee the final months of World War II and the beginning of